With that, let me welcome my friend, founder, and chief visionary officer of Cervivor, Tamika Felder. Tamika is a cancer survivor, award-winning women's health advocate, the chief visionary officer of Cervivor Inc., a nonprofit dedicated to cervical cancer advocacy and support. Tamika also has a mission to eradicate cancer and shine a spotlight on patient voices in healthcare. Named a cancer rebel by Newsweek, Tamika is a highly sought after speaker on cervical cancer advocacy, cancer prevention, HPV education, and living life with purpose. An award-winning television producer and host, Tamika is a captivating personality as well as an engaging and talented storyteller. She has and continues to share her story at many critical platforms, including on presidential panels convened by the White House, national HPV and cervical cancer roundtables, has trained thousands of ambassadors using her signature patient advocacy framework, and traveled internationally to share her experiences with women around the world. Without further ado, Tamika Felder.
Thank you, Minyo, for that wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here. I'm happy to see as many faces as I can on here. And, you know, with everything that was said in that introduction, who I am at the core is just a woman who was diagnosed with cervical cancer and it was a life-changing experience. And what do we do with that? Next slide. So we're lifting voices. Why? Because we want to drive global action. And so what it happens when we talk about cervical cancer, we can't have one voice. I remember being diagnosed and looking for that voice. And during the time, I found one other woman, Christine Bays, who some of you may know that story, but it has taken some time to gather people in spaces like this to share their stories. And why? Because that is what it's going to take if we're truly going to eliminate it. Next slide. So we've already done the introduction, and so we're going to forward to the next slide. I wear many hats. You've heard all about that. Next slide. And this is me. As a little girl growing up in America, in South Carolina, I always had a microphone. And years later, as a television producer, I had a microphone. Now, as a speaker, I still have a microphone. And what I choose to use that microphone is to bring awareness and eliminate cervical cancer. Why? Because we can. I want to tell you a story about my father who died of colon cancer the day before my 17th birthday. You know, when he died of colon cancer in 1992, we didn't have screening like we did. We didn't have all of the things that we have. But for cervical cancer, we have the tools. We have what we can to eliminate cervical cancer. We also have what we need to prevent it now in people, right? In generations who will still get cervical cancer, but we have what we have to eliminate it in future generations. So we have to use our voices. One of the things that I'll ask that you do today is that everything that you learn, and I know this group, you'll do it, you share. You empower other people to use their voices, whether they're touched directly by cervical cancer or not, because we can do something about this cancer. Next slide. Being diagnosed at 25 with cervical cancer was life-changing. At 25, I thought I was an adult. I thought I was grown up. I thought I knew everything. And the truth was I was still just a young girl starting life. My diagnosis was caught early. And with that early diagnosis, it meant, and I know this is the safe space where I can say this, I lost the top third of my vagina. I didn't lose my life, but having early caught cervical cancer meant that I not only lost the top third of my vagina, but I lost my womb. I lost everything at the time that I thought that made me a woman. I lost everything that I thought that made me whole. Next slide. It's been a journey. I endured a radical hysterectomy, chemotherapy, radiation therapy, loss of my fertility, and even now, 2 decades later, I deal with secondary post-cancer issues because of my cervical cancer. And I repeat that my cervical cancer was caught early. What would my life have been like if cervical cancer was a thing of the past? I wouldn't have to endure these things. But that's not my testimony. My testimony is that I was diagnosed with cervical cancer, and I made a promise to God that if I survived it, that I would use my story, that I would use my voice to make a difference. And I believe that I am doing that. Next slide. So how did I become a survivor with an S to a survivor with a C? How I refer to it. It's how I make my survivorship count. In 2001, as the general population, I didn't know much about cervical cancer. I didn't know anything about HPV, and I pride myself as someone who knows a lot of information. I pay attention to the news. I pay attention to health talks. I didn't know anything about the human papilloma virus. But now that I do, and now that I'm impacted by it, I want to make my survivorship count. When I was diagnosed, I didn't even know the colors of the cervical cancer ribbon. I was like, where is a cervical cancer walk? Where are these things? Where are the support groups for cervical cancer? Where are the people talking about cervical cancer? And so out of my frustration of my own cancer diagnosis, Cervivor was born. Next slide. And so I simply built what I didn't have. There were websites, not many, but they had women whose faces were hidden in silhouettes. I wanted to see faces. I wanted to know real women who were impacted by cervical cancer. I wanted to know real people with a cervix who wanted to share their story. But I also wanted people to share the truth, how hard cervical cancer is, because one of the things I heard when I was first diagnosed, that cervical cancer is easy. When you get diagnosed with cervical cancer, you have a few cells removed or you have a hysterectomy. And I thought to myself, someone who's never had a hysterectomy is saying that. Someone who's never had chemotherapy coursing through their veins is saying that. Someone who can't have radiation because their country doesn't have it, or their country does not have a gynecologic oncologist, only a medical oncologist is saying that. So with Cervivor, I built what I didn't have, and I wanted to make sure for the next generation, it was a little easier where support was. Next slide. What I've learned along the way is that you're never alone. It takes one person to share their story, and then it's like a domino effect, and there are other people sharing their story. You're going to hear from Binda, who is amazing. And if we didn't share our stories, we would have never found each other and know that there's another sister on the opposite side of the world sharing their story. And so that's what Cervivor is about. One, that you're never alone. Next slide. But we also want to take it a step further. We want people to know that they can do something with their voice, that they can share their powerful survivor stories. And how do we do that? We do that through our Survivor School. Our Survivor School is about patient advocacy. It is about making sure that, you know, if you want to share your story, you have the tools to share your stories. And so we do that. We get involved. January is Cervical Cancer Awareness Month. And if you're thinking about what you can do, you can get involved then. You can get involved for February 4th, World Cancer Day. You absolutely have to help us raise awareness and make noise on March 4th for International HPV Awareness Day. And doing this work sometimes can feel like we're not moving the needle, that it's moving slowly. But what I can tell you is that there is so much happening with cervical cancer, but we're not moving it as we should because people are still dying. People do die of cervical cancer, and they should not be. So let's all work together. Let's share our powerful voices. Let's make it a safe space so other survivors will come forward and share their stories. I am honored to be here with you all today. And if you need me, you can reach out to me directly. I'll put my email in the chat, but here you can connect with me on social media in different places. but I want you to know that we value you and the work that you do in this space. And I thank you so very much. And you're about to hear from another dynamic person, and I'm excited.